In this video, I'm going to run you through some essential tips to help you get started in Skyrim. We're going to start with some information that will help you to navigate the various versions of the game and its DLCs. Then we're going to move on to some tips that cover your character build, including race choice, skills and perks, as well as some things that you can do early in the game to get a strong start. And then following this, we're going to move into a broader range of tips that will be useful throughout your entire playthrough, including easy ways to make gold, how to take advantage of crafting skills, and much, much more. Now, just before we start, if you've been enjoying my RPG guides and reviews, then please remember to like and subscribe, as well as clicking the bell notification, as it does make a huge difference to the reach of my videos. And if you want to take supporting my content creation a step further, I now have a Buy Me a Coffee link that you can find in the description down below. Anyway, let's start by making sure that you know which version of the game to buy in the first place. Because when it comes to Skyrim, this isn't as simple a choice as you might imagine, due to the fact that the game has been released so many times and in so many formats. I'll summarise it for you. The original version of the game was released in 2011 for PC, PS3 and Xbox 360. And I'd suggest that you probably don't want to play this version of the game unless you're restricted by only owning one of these older consoles. The reason for this is that Skyrim Special Edition released 5 years later in 2016 and massively overhauled the game's graphics, making for a drastically improved visual experience, as well as also including all of the game's DLC as standard, basically making the 2011 version obsolete unless you particularly enjoy the original graphics. In terms of platforms, Skyrim Special Edition is available for PC, PS4 and 5, Xbox One and Series X, and it even has a version for the Nintendo Switch that came out a year later in 2017. 2017 also saw the release of Skyrim VR, which is available for PC and PS4, and that I stopped playing after about 5 minutes due to motion sickness. I'd describe this version of Skyrim as a bit of a gimmick if I'm honest, but if you're deep into VR then it's maybe worth a go. Finally, you have the Anniversary Edition, which might seem like the obvious one to buy as it was released most recently in 2021. However, the Anniversary Edition is a little unusual, as what it does is it takes Skyrim Special Edition and packages in a whole bunch of community-created mods. Now, some of these mods are absolutely excellent and add whole new storylines to the game, as well as many other features. However, they do muddy the waters in terms of the original Skyrim experience. So if you want to experience the game in its purest form, then I'd say go for Special Edition. And if you're happy to have some carefully curated mods baked in as default, then maybe consider the Anniversary version. Now, I mentioned the game's DLC in the previous tip, and I'll give you a bit more detail on it here, as it's definitely not something you're going to want to miss out on. Basically, you have 3 major DLCs for Skyrim. Firstly, you have Dawnguard, which in my opinion offers one of the game's strongest storylines, pulling you into a major conflict between the vampires of House Volkihar and the vampire hunters of the Dawnguard, as well as offering features such as the ability to become a vampire lord and unlock the use of crossbows, among many other things. Then you have Dragonborn, which again is one of the game's more immersive storylines in my view, and the DLC also offers a brand new zone with the island of Solstheim, a Daedric Plain of Oblivion to explore, and even gives you the ability to tame and ride dragons. And then finally you have Hearthfire, which unlike the other two isn't a story-based DLC. What it does do, however, is unlock the ability for players to purchase land and build houses on that land, as well as a whole bunch of other more minor features such as the ability to farm, hire staff, and even adopt children. In terms of getting hold of the DLCs, it's pretty simple. If you purchase Skyrim Special Edition or Anniversary Edition, you're going to get all 3 DLCs by default. And in terms of how you actually start the DLCs in-game, well, I have guides on my channel that will tell you exactly how to do just that, and I'll link them in the description down below. Anyway, moving on to some tips around your character build. And let's start with race. And while it's not a make or break decision, it is a meaningful one, and picking the right race for your build can be incredibly useful, especially when playing on the game's higher difficulty settings. Basically, choosing the right race will give you a nice boost in the early game by giving you an early advantage in a number of skills, as well as ensuring that you have the best passive abilities and racial powers for your build in the long run. I won't go into massive detail here as this isn't intended as an in-depth guide, though I do have an in-depth race guide on my channel and I'll link it in the description alongside the others. However, for the purpose of this quick tips video, let's take a look at one example. So say you want to play as a mage type character. Well, in that case, you couldn't go too far wrong with playing as a high elf. Why? Well, because they have an incredibly powerful racial ability that allows them to regenerate magicka 25 times faster for 60 seconds once per day. This essentially turns them into an unstoppable maelstrom of magical damage and allows them to beat almost any enemy with ease. It's hands down the most powerful offensive magic ability of any race in the game. And then on top of this, they also get a baseline plus 50 magicka, which is particularly noticeable early on, as well as a skill bonus to basically every school of magic, making them an ideal early game spellcaster. Whereas if you chose Orc, for example, you'd receive very minimal benefits for a mage build. But on the flip side, you would gain arguably the best abilities for a warrior build. Basically, it's well worth looking into the best races for each build type, and as I already said, I've covered this in depth in another video. On the topic of character builds, you may have noticed that Skyrim doesn't give you the option to select a class, as you would in many other RPGs. Well, this is because the game features a totally classless system, in which any character can level any skill that they desire simply by using that skill. Basically, the system works like this. There are 18 different skill trees in the game, broadly grouped into warrior, mage, and thief-oriented skills. As I said, you can level any one of these skills simply by using it. For example, hitting an enemy with a one-handed sword will give you experience towards your one-handed skill, and casting a destruction spell will give you experience towards your destruction skill, and so on. Each time you level up a skill, that will contribute a small amount of experience towards leveling up your character as a whole. When your character gains a level, you'll be able to increase one of your three main attributes, health, stamina or magicka, by a small amount. And you'll be given a perk point to spend in one of the perk trees that are attached to each of the 18 skills, which will provide you with either a passive or active ability that improves that skill. It's a pretty good system, and it actually offers a great deal of flexibility and depth in terms of the combat styles available to you. Word of warning here though, while perk points are fairly easy to come by in the early game, as you progress they become more and more difficult to obtain. This is because when your skills are at a higher level, it takes longer to progress them, meaning that it's going to take more swings with a sword to level your one-handed skill, and you're going to have to cast more destruction spells to level your destruction skill, which ultimately means that it takes longer for your character to gain a level and to be awarded with a perk point to spend. This means that if you've wasted your perks early on, it's going to become increasingly difficult and time-consuming to earn more perk points to correct your build. This actually leads neatly into our next tip, and that is that it's always worth having a playstyle in mind when you start a new character, as despite the flexibility that the game offers through its classless system, there's clearly a benefit to be gained from matching your race with the skills that you're going to focus on, and to allocating your perk points as effectively as possible in order to avoid wasting them and having to grind out additional perks. Also, as you progress through the game, it can be quite frustrating having to use underleveled skills against more powerful enemies, and it's generally a more enjoyable experience to naturally level the skills for your desired build as your character progresses. Obviously you can't plan for everything up front, and naturally you might change your mind, which is fine of course. I'm just saying that it's worth giving your desired playstyle at least a few minutes thought to save you some pain later on. The final thing worth mentioning in terms of your character build is to ensure that you pick up a blessing from one of the standing stones after leaving the tutorial. You can find 3 of these stones on the path to Helgen, as you can see on the screen right now. These are the Warrior, Mage and Thief stones, and they will allow your combat, magic or stealth skills to level 20% faster, and that blessing will persist until you go and swap it for another one. If you do want to swap it out, then you can return to the stones at any time and do so, which is useful if you decide that you want to switch to leveling a different set of skills. However, if you want to level a broad range of skills and don't want to be constantly returning to the stones in order to switch, then you can find a stone called the Lover Stone to the northeast of Markarth, and this stone grants you a blessing that will allow you to level all skills 15% faster, which to me is far more preferable than constantly switching blessings for the sake of 5%. Okay, so hopefully that puts you in a pretty good place when it comes to building your character. Let's move on now to some more generalised tips that you can utilise from the very beginning of the game in order to get the most out of your experience. And my first tip in this category is to save the game. A lot. The autosave in Skyrim isn't particularly good, and the reason why is that the game only really autosaves when you load into a new area. And the problem with that is that you can spend multiple hours in the open world without ever loading into a new area, which means that if you die without saving after having spent multiple hours doing various things in the open world, then you're going to lose all of your progress, spiral into an uncontrollable rage, and potentially put your keyboard straight through your monitor. So yeah, save the game. A lot. Speaking of the open world, my next tip is to explore everything, and I really do mean everything. Skyrim is a vast and incredibly interactive world. You never know when you're going to stumble upon something interesting. It might be a quest, an item, a new system to engage in, a snippet of the game's deep and rich lore, among many other possibilities. And you're never going to stumble upon these things if you don't explore. It's really the way that Elder Scrolls games are designed to be played. They don't expect you to follow a linear path. You get to pick your own adventure to a great extent. So be sure to delve dungeons, explore caves, speak to every NPC you find, read books, loot things, and just interact with the world. This is a game where going off the beaten track is encouraged and rewarded. So let your curiosity win, and you won't regret it. Another piece of advice that I'd give when it comes to exploration is not to overly use fast travel, especially if you're going to be travelling through a route that you haven't previously explored. As I said in my previous point, you find so much content through exploration, and you're not going to get much opportunity for this exploration if you're just teleporting between cities rather than taking some of your journeys by foot. And strictly speaking, you don't even have to go by foot, as you can get yourself a horse, which offers a bit of a compromise, I suppose, as you can travel a bit faster on a horse, but without missing a ton of content by fast travelling everywhere. Horses are also pretty useful for getting away quickly if you stray into a fight that you're not quite ready to handle. And you can fire your bow from horseback as well, which is kind of fun. There are a number of different ways to obtain a horse in-game, but the most basic and obvious method is to simply buy one from the Whiterun stables. Though there are a number of methods to get one for free if you're willing to do a little research, but that's a bit beyond the scope of this quick tips video. In a similar spirit to not overly using fast travel, I'd also suggest not overly using mods during your first playthrough. Now, this is a bit of a controversial one, and there will be people who definitely disagree with me, but I genuinely believe that it's worth getting the pure Skyrim experience at least once. And while mods can do amazing things to the game, they can also change it so dramatically that it basically becomes a totally different game. If you're going to use mods in your first playthrough, I'd maybe consider sticking to mods that do things like remove bugs and enhance visuals, rather than those that totally alter the story or introduce entirely new features. But of course, it's up to you. Now, despite me saying just a moment ago that you don't need to follow a set path in terms of how you choose to progress the game, there are some quest lines that are good to complete, or at least partially complete early on, due to what they offer you. Firstly, you have the main story quest, which I'd suggest progressing at least to the point that dragons start randomly spawning into the world, which will happen after you kill the first dragon just outside of Whiterun. This is primarily so that you can access dragon shouts. These are powerful spells that are particularly useful in combat and don't require any particular skill to use or improve. You can learn these shouts from the word walls that are found all over Skyrim, both within dungeons and out in the open world, and there's no prerequisite to doing so. However, once you learn a shout from a word wall, you need to absorb a dragon soul in order to start using that shout, which you can only obtain by killing a dragon. So no dragons means no dragon souls, and ultimately no shouts. The downside of unlocking dragons is that being randomly attacked by dragons all the time can get a little tedious. So it's up to you as to how much you value having shouts available. Another questline that's worth kicking off early doors is the Dark Brotherhood. There are a number of benefits offered, but the big ones for me are: number one, it gives you some very powerful gear rewards for thief-based characters, such as the Ancient Shrouded Armor set. Number two, it provides you with one of the best horses in the game, Shadowmere. And number three, the final quest rewards you with a staggering 20,000 gold, which is a pretty hefty chunk of change during the early stages of the game, and it will set you up quite comfortably. To join the Dark Brotherhood, you'll need to complete the Innocence Lost quest that you can pick up from Aventus Aretino in Windhelm. And then, once you've completed this quest, you'll need to go to sleep in order to trigger the Dark Brotherhood questline to begin. I'll link a video down below that will give you a step-by-step guide to joining each of Skyrim's guilds. Speaking of which, it's also worth considering joining the Thieves Guild early on, as similarly to the Dark Brotherhood, it offers some very nice gear rewards for thief-based characters, among other things such as financial rewards and access to trainers. But most importantly, it provides you with access to fences who will buy stolen goods from you, which can be a really nice way of making some easy gold. And we'll talk about that when we get into our gold making tips later in the video. To join the Thieves Guild, you simply need to go to the Riften Marketplace in the daytime and complete a task for Brynjolf. Then just follow the questline from there. Now, despite the College of Winterhold being my least favourite guild in Skyrim, due to the fairly lackluster questline, it's still worth joining early on if you want to build a mage type character. This is primarily due to the college giving you access to spellbook vendors as well as a range of expert trainers. On top of this, you can also get some nice rewards, such as the Archmage's Robes, a really strong item for spellcasters that provides a boost to the majority of your magic-based skills. To join, you simply need to travel to Winterhold and speak to the NPC guarding the bridge to the College of Winterhold, and that'll kick off the questline. Of course, it's not only obtaining weapons and armor and learning new spells that's going to enhance your combat ability in Skyrim. There are also a range of non-combat skills that can play a major role, and I'd definitely recommend taking advantage of them. Firstly, you have Enchanting, which allows you to apply powerful effects to your equipment, such as increased weapon damage, reduced spell costs, and improved spell resistances, just to name a few. How to actually use Enchanting is too much of an in-depth subject for this quick tips guide, and the intention of this video is really just to let you know that these powerful features are available to you. However, I'll link my detailed Enchanting guide in the description down below for those of you who want to explore further. Another one you can take advantage of is Alchemy, which is going to allow you to craft potions that will boost your stats, restore health, magicka and stamina, or enhance skills like sneak, lockpicking and speech, as well as giving you the ability to create poisons that can be used for things like weakening enemies, dealing damage over time, or lowering enemy resistances. Again, I'll put an in-depth alchemy guide down below for those interested. The final non-combat skill is Smithing, which basically allows you to upgrade your weapons and armor to maximize your damaging and defensive capabilities. This is achieved through creating high quality gear such as Daedric and Dragonbone armor and weapons. And if you really want to make the most of it, you can combine Smithing with Enchanting to make some of these items exceptionally powerful. And you probably guessed it, I have an in-depth smithing guide that I'll pop in the description down below. I'm not suggesting that you power level any of these skills, by the way, just that you utilize them as your character progresses, ensuring that you level them alongside your other skills so that they remain useful. In fact, there are some real downsides to over-focusing on non-combat skills early on, and this is because leveling them will of course cause your character to level as well, which of course is going to be a real problem given that enemies scale to your level for the most part, so just be a bit careful with that. Another really cool thing about these crafting skills is that they can also be used to make gold. A shitload of gold in fact. For example, you can use transmutation to turn iron ore into silver and gold, and then use that gold to create expensive jewelry using smithing. To get started with this method, you're going to need the transmute spell, which can be found at Halted Stream Camp at this location on the map. Once you get there, you'll need to enter the mine, kill the guard and loot their key to get through the first gate, and then clear out the bandit leader and their cronies in the next room. Once you've dealt with them, you can head over to this table to loot the spell tome. You can then turn any iron ore into your inventory into silver, and then subsequently into gold. And you can then use that gold to craft jewelry that you can flog for an easy profit. Another easy gold making method is to use Enchanting to significantly increase the value of items before you sell them. And this is actually a great one to combine with the previous method of using ore transmutation to make jewelry. All you need to do is take that piece of jewelry and slap an enchant on it to significantly increase its value. Some enchants are worth a lot more than others, and clearly I can't cover them all in this video, but you can easily look it up. Finally, you can also make some very easy money using alchemy. The general principle is to loot every single ingredient you come across, combine them into potions using alchemy, and then to flog them for a tasty profit. It really is as simple as that. As with enchants, some potions are worth a lot more than others, and again, it's worth looking up if you want to make some serious gold. There is of course the more dishonest way of making a bit of gold, and I already alluded to this when we talked about the Thieves Guild, and that is of course simply stealing items and selling them to a fence. Some items you won't even need to fence. For example, if you steal potion ingredients, ores or soul gems, and then use them to craft other items, such as potions or jewelry for example, then the resulting items are not going to be considered stolen, so you've effectively fenced the ingredients. I do of course have a gold making guide on my channel that covers all of these methods in a lot more detail, which I'll link along with the many others I've mentioned in the description down below. Oh, and one more thing to note when it comes to stealing stuff, and just looting in general actually, is that it always makes sense to focus on items that have a favourable weight to value ratio. This includes jewelry, gems, expensive potions, enchanted light armour. You get the idea, stuff that's going to offer serious value without instantly filling your inventory and making you encumbered. If you simply have so many riches that you can't possibly carry them all on your own, however, you can recruit a follower to carry some of it for you. Just be warned that if they dive on them and you already have a pretty full inventory yourself, then you're going to end up with a pretty frustrating problem of having to work out how to get it to a shop to sell it. The best thing to do to mitigate this is to buy a player house, and to dump both of your inventories there every time you visit town. The cheapest player house can be found in Whiterun, and you can purchase it from the Jarl's Steward in Dragonreach Keep for 5,000 gold after completing the Dragon Rising quest, which is part of the main storyline. I have a guide that will show you how to get every single player house in the game, and you probably know where to find it by now. Let's move on to the final section of tips, which is what I would consider to be largely unlinked miscellaneous tips, but things that are still very useful to know. The first tip in this section is to always be skeptical of level scaling in Skyrim, as while the game does feature a level scaling system for most enemies, it's not universally applied. Most famously, giants and mammoths are not subject to the same scaling as the majority of other enemies in the game, which means that in the early game they will absolutely clap you if you happen to stray into one of their camps. So proceed with caution and don't assume that you'll be able to defeat all foes at any level due to the game's scaling. It's also worth knowing about the favourites menu, which allows you to quickly change weapons and armour, or use items without having to navigate Skyrim's cumbersome inventory system. You simply need to favourite that item in your inventory, and then use the Q hotkey, on PC at least, to open the favourites menu and quickly access that item when you need it. Speaking of weapons, it's worth knowing that enchanted weapons in-game have a limited number of charges and that you're going to need to use a soul gem to recharge them. You can do this by selecting the weapon in your inventory and pressing the recharge button, but be warned that this will permanently consume the soul gem in the process, so you're always going to want to have a few of them on you. One cool little feature of Skyrim that could easily be missed is that you can actually become a vampire, or even a vampire lord if you have the Dawnguard DLC. Vampirism actually comes with quite a few disadvantages, so it's definitely worth looking into it before making the leap, but vampire lords in particular are especially powerful, so you may consider it worthwhile. For more detail, you can check out my very in-depth Skyrim vampirism guide that I'll link down below. On a similar note, you can also become a werewolf in Skyrim, which, very much like being a vampire lord, gives you access to a whole new skill tree as well as a range of other benefits. And to gain access to lycanthropy, you simply need to follow the Companions questline. This quest can be started in Jorvaska, the Companions Hall in Whiterun, and obviously I have an in-depth werewolf guide for those interested in finding out more. Another thing worth knowing if you're totally new to Elder Scrolls games in general is that Skyrim features a law system, and if you're caught breaking the law, you'll be fined and sent to prison by the guards, and if you resist, they'll kill you. Which leads me to my final and probably most important point of the entire video. Whatever you do in this game, leave the chickens alone. Nothing will anger the townsfolk more than an unprovoked assault on their beloved livestock. If you're reckless enough to perpetrate this most heinous of crimes, then you'll be promptly hacked to pieces by the guards. Anyway, that should put you in a pretty good place to get started with Skyrim. Clearly you can find a shed load more detail on my channel when it comes to Skyrim guides, so check those out if you're interested. Also, if you enjoyed the video, then please remember to like and subscribe for more RPG guides and reviews, and if you're feeling especially generous, I also have a Buy Me a Coffee page and all support there is very gratefully received. Either way, thanks for watching and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.